Thanks for joining us today, guys. Today we are joined by Joe Menninger. Excited to have this conversation. He's an expert on the entrepreneurial scene over in Germany and lots of insights to share with us today. So excited to have Joe. Joe, to get us started, can you share a little bit about your background and kind of where you are today and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. First, thanks for having me, Liam. Um, my name's originally Joe Menninger, but I know the Americans are not good with the umlaut, so Joe Menninger is totally fine. I have a past working for 12 years in consulting, 2 out of them as a startup scout for a large company here in Germany, helping to facilitate cooperation between corporates and startups. And the other 10 years are basically spent as a consultant in capital markets, working a lot around all the stuff that is going on there in terms of trading, in terms of mutual funds and stuff like this. Not necessarily really with the investments, but more with the machines, with the strategies, with the businesses the investments are running on.
So you've got a lot of experience working with the platforms and the money, and then also directly with the startups and the entrepreneurial companies, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's always a good combination to have.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit, as you've gone out and you started up Startup Radio, and you've kind of journeyed away from Deloitte, the question we always like to ask is, what's your framework for how you think about profitability, where you start to put investment. Obviously, you had to have something that allowed you to go on this journey and start, the company that you've got today. And so kind of would love to hear from your perspective, kind of how you thought about that as you were going through your Deloitte days and, as you look to the future, kind of how you think about profitability and where you invest.
Okay, first, I saved some money, and when I left Deloitte, the idea was I want to try out being an entrepreneur for quite some time. I couldn't force myself to do it, so I was kind of forced to do that. So I had money left in the bank account, and that's basically all that I used to start up startup.radio. But admittedly, I had some track record to rely on. Basically, at this point in time, I was running the podcast for already more than 6 years, and I had something like 250 episodes out. So that was something to build on. But I have to admit, I also used what in the startup world you would call a pivot. So basically, in the beginning, I was going for 2 publications of podcasts a week, looking for sponsors to sponsor that, and that would be my income. Didn't work out. So I had to rely on my skills as a consultant and as a startup scout to keep myself afloat and to build on startup.radio. And that's basically what I do now with the podcast. Also added a 24/7 internet radio station at startup.radio. And in between all of that, I'm working as a startup scout and as a consultant, mostly for corporates or larger companies to help them, especially cooperate with startups.
I'm sure that consulting background played really well to your point, right? In terms of as you're starting your own business and, whether it was market analysis or sizing or pivot and strategic direction, how important was that framework and consulting kind of background that you had, in playing into identifying those pivots and where to push the business?
That had some importance. So I was always running a lot on Excel sheets, on Google Sheets, whatever. I was doing some calculations, but basically most of the stuff was validating my feelings, my gut feeling, where there were opportunities. And sometimes I was just approached by startups, by investors, by corporates. Hey, can you help me with that? And that's basically the opportunities I jumped on. You can have awesome Excel models. You can have awesome PowerPoint presentations. But personal feeling, most of the time, they don't survive the meeting with reality.
It's always great on paper, right? Execution
Yeah.
is a whole different ballgame.
If the people mostly listen to this, they cannot see it, but you have a broad smile on your face here.
Yes, I've been there. I've had that fancy deck, out of the beginning when I was just starting, and it was like, oh, this is really nice toilet paper. That's what this is at this point in time, right? So much that had to be done. But um, let's talk a little bit about, with your work working with entrepreneurs, sole proprietors, right? You are essentially the go-to guy for finding that talent in Germany for people who are not in Germany, right? Everything you do is in English, broadcast to a wide foreign network. So as you're talking to these people, right, I'm sure we have listeners who are thinking like, okay, how do I use what Joe's got, and how do I figure out, right, how do I position, how do I, make sure I'm ready to get money, or, position for capital? What are some of those things that you are looking for, right, or that your clients are asking you to go find in Germany? What are those characteristics of some of those companies?
Ooh, that's a pretty good question because I work independent from industries. So most of the time I'm looking for people, for good entrepreneurs on behalf of my investors that I'm working for. Most of the time the investors are professional investors. They are in an area where they're big enough to have investments abroad, but they're too small to have a permanent presence somewhere here in Germany, somewhere in Europe. That's basically the sweet spot where I fit in. And then they approach me. Most of the time, they give me a cold call because they got my phone number from somewhere, or they just reaching out via email on my podcast, and they just asking, hey, can you help me with this and that? We are looking for. But most of the time it has to fit in terms of the personality of the investor. And they're really awesome people out there with the entrepreneur, and they can also be awesome people, but they don't necessarily work together pretty well. So that is something I do for them. And on the other side, I'm not necessarily quite often help startups with investments. Sometimes I give them strategic advice when they are looking, well, should I do venture debt? Should I do venture capital? Is there revenue-based financing available? Stuff like this. But I don't necessarily help or am the corporate finance consultant that helps them directly get the money shoveled in. Um, in terms of speaking with investment readiness, that's usually a tough one because you may have been on the website of some startups and they say, we call what we do blah, 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 because most of the time that's exactly what you understand. Yeah, yada yada, something. They're so deep in their industry, in their specifics, in their topic, that it's really, really hard for somebody who's not very familiar with at least the surroundings, what they're doing, to really understand what they are doing. And most of the time it's as simple as, if there's a pitch and their grandma could understand it, theoretically at least, if she could speak English, then they have a good pitch. But most of the time it's really hard to tell if a startup or what a startup is doing from their website, because they try to have a USP, and then they have some people who do some wording, do some marketing, and then it goes through the process 2 to 3 times, and then you totally have no clue what they're actually doing. And the best startups, they really have it nailed on. You get on their website, they say da da da, that's it. You understand it. That's the best ones, and that's usually some of the most successful ones.
Interesting. It sounds like a lot of clarity is very important in terms of knowing exactly what they're doing and how to communicate it in a simple way, so that the idea can take off. Seems like it's critical.
That's exactly what I try to do in my podcast. I know more than almost 50% of my audience is listening to my podcast to get to know more startups, and most of them don't speak German at all. So basically, that's the door I'm opening for them on my podcast as well as professionally. But yes, clarity is always important, and I try to keep it as simple as possible. Sometimes this is quite challenging. For example, I once had a lady there with a PhD in physics and a postdoc, and basically what it all came down to was her startup was able to reliably construct nanostructures. And it's something, if you have to explain it in an audio only podcast, this is quite challenging, but hopefully we achieve that there. And especially if you're talking about finance, capital markets, I go pretty deep into detail. And then there is a lot of further readings, what I call links where people can read and read and read about it. Usually, if you're not familiar with finance, you listen to fintech interview where I talk a lot about specifics. The interview may be 45 minutes and you can read in further readings for like 2-3 days.
That's a lot of detailed material to go dive into, right?
Yeah, fortunately, it's not from me, but it's a material provided by something like Wikipedia, Investopedia, some blogs, some explainer videos, stuff like that. As I said, I try to keep it simple and just to break down a really good business model, a really good startup into those simple terms. That already helps quite a lot in order to be able to raise funds. Plus, what I learned, you have to be not realistic. For example, I talked to the guys behind Emma. Emma is a mattress startup comparable to something like Oscar does in the US. And they said they have been very capital efficient for the very simple reason they never got a lot of VC capital because they've been too realistic with the projections, because usually the VCs expect to be the projections a little bit too optimistic, and they had very realistic projections that they even overachieved, but with those projections they couldn't get VC funding or enough VC funding.
Fascinating. And I'm guessing that goes to some of the market sizing and making it worth it from the VC, right? In terms of the rate of growth as well as the size of the business. And so it sounds like it's this balance between the dreamer that you have to have as an entrepreneur in terms of, hey, I'm going to change the world, or I'm going to be the best mattress in all of Germany, with, okay, there's going to be a steady growth, organic, right? And I think it's almost, to your point, it's that change of organic growth and VC growth are two different projections. And how do you communicate that and show that in a way that, you know, is reliable, makes sense, and also gets them excited, right? It sounds like the biggest thing there is it's not getting the VC guys excited in terms of the total market.
Yeah, it is totally still a people's business. So you can have very bad presentation, but if you excite the person you're talking to, if it really, we say in Germany, if it clicks, if you get a connection to it, it really works. So it's still a human to human business, whatever you call it.
Let's go back a little bit. So we talked about the importance of clarity. We talked about the relational dynamics that you're trying to figure out. The relational dynamics, it sounds like, is that between your employer, the person looking to invest, and the company, or is it the inner working relationships at the entrepreneurial company?
Well, actually, if I need to help with the inner workings of the entrepreneurial company, I would stay away from it as an investment. Oh, you're laughing. Okay, yeah. But basically, yeah, it's a human to human business. Most of the time, I have to help my clients from abroad to connect with the entrepreneurs I find here in Germany. But admittedly, it's getting easier and easier because a lot of those people that I have there, they speak sometimes even 5 languages. They graduated from universities abroad, including the US and Asia and so on and so forth. So they're a very smart bunch. And then usually it's pretty easy to get them really connected on the same level to the international VCs.
Awesome. As we were chatting ahead of the podcast, we talked a little bit, you were talking about the kind of leader of the entrepreneurial company and being able to clarity of what they do, I think, is important. But we were also talking about, you know, how they think through strategic challenges, and you're kind of evaluating that thought process in terms of how they think, what they think, have they thought things through? Kind of, what are you looking for on that front?
The most important skill maybe that they're able to reflect on themselves. Yeah, I did here good, I did bad here, and I need to improve to really work on this and this and that. That may be one of the most important skills, because you can teach a person quite a lot of stuff, a lot of analytic tools. They can acquire the capability to learn analytic tools. That's not all the problem. But if they don't reflect, if they don't understand where are my shortcomings, where do I need to learn, where do I need to be a little, especially more proactive as an entrepreneur, that's what we are looking for most of the time, because then you get really interesting conversations, because they say, yeah, here we can do this and this and this and that, and there we would need those people for, and that's most of the funding we're asking for. And that's basically when the VC says, oh yeah, makes sense.
So it's almost like you don't want to have
Yeah.
all rainbows and unicorns. There's got to be something that was challenging, or you learned, or a stumbling block along the way to show how you've been able to handle some of that difficulty.
Yes, exactly. Whatever you do in life, you will hit road bumps. And the most important thing, I do believe, is how you deal with them. Not only on an entrepreneurial, not only on a financial basis, but also on a personal basis. And that is something you learn over time. And that is something they are also looking for. For example, I just got off an interview with a startup who found out their business model would not be working, and they raised VC money from the investors and say, okay, that's it. That's 5 options. We want to investigate. Can you give us funding for that? And they got some funding.
So it sounds like, if we were to summarize, a couple key things that they're looking for. One is, the personality. Does it fit with the investor? 2 is, do they have clarity on, what their niche is, where they fit in? Have they been able to overcome roadblocks, think strategically, pivot accordingly? And then, what do the projections look like, and do they support, the ability for investment to come in?
Yeah, the last one would be kind of the gut feeling. Where are opportunities?
Does it? Yeah, that makes sense. Is this something that can grow, that makes sense, good opportunity for the money coming in, right?
Yeah, just like Mr. Bezos had the feeling a few years ago that he would be able to sell books online.
So it's a wonderful feeling. Turned out quite well for him.
Yeah, I think so.
So as we're moving into the final parts here, Joe, what's the most exciting thing that you're working on, or that you're seeing today?
Well, personally, I'm working on a more automated approach to match the startups with potential investors, with corporates, and it is called startup.radio.com. So far, we have a landing page where you can sign up early. We have it running for something like 80 days, and we have more than 2,500 signups yet. And we're really excited about that. And we are moving forward in building this platform starting this year. And hopefully there will be a better version this fall, this winter.
It's awesome. That sounds super exciting. Obviously ties in with all of your experience, which is great. If you were to leave one piece of feedback for the audience, one piece of advice, what would that be?
I would say every time you fail, in terms of investment, in terms of private life, in terms of business, ask yourself the question, what did I learn from it?
Do you take yourself through, so what did I learn from it? Do you take that any further, or is it really just that awareness that's key for you?
So basically, I try to reflect a lot and learn the best from all the successes I had, as well as the failures. So basically, what did I learn from it? Not rely on unreliable partners or stuff like this. So basically, that is something I try to use to build my own mental framework.
Makes perfect sense. As we're wrapping up here, right, and I assume that mental framework just continues to build, right, as you've got more and more experiences, right, in terms of life lessons, et cetera, and it shapes how you think, who you are, right, and how you move forward, which becomes very powerful, right? It becomes your DNA effectively. As we're wrapping up,
As
Go
of
ahead.
now, I don't have as many rules as Gibbs in NCIS, but I'm working on it.
As we're wrapping up here, Joe, what's the best way for the audience to connect back with you?
Well, they can basically go on the website of either my internet radio station or my podcast. One of them is startup.radio. Obviously, that's a radio station. You can reach out there. Or they can directly find me, Joern, Menninger, or they can go to my podcast, startup.radio, and there they can also reach out.
That part broke up a little bit for me, Joe. So yeah, let's redo that just to make sure we catch that, because obviously that's the critical part for you.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
best way for them to connect with you.
Yeah, best way to connect is directly to reach out on LinkedIn, Joern Menninger. But they can also reach me via my internet radio station, startup.radio, and on my podcast, www.startuprate.io.
Awesome. Appreciate the time today, Joe, and look forward to staying in touch and seeing your recommendations for startups in Germany.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being on your podcast, and thanks for the time.